Arizona has over 100 ghost towns scattered across its deserts and mountains, and most people drive right past them without a second look. Some are well known, some are barely a footnote, but every single one of them has a story that most people have never heard. So let's get into it. Here are 13 ghost towns in Arizona you probably don't know. Ghost Town 13, Ruby. Let's start with one of the most well-preserved ghost towns in the entire state, and one of the most dangerous places to have lived in the early 20th century. Ruby sits in a remote valley in Santa Cruz County, about 30 miles west of Nogales, and just 4 miles north of the Mexican border. Mining started there around 1877, and the Montana mine eventually produced gold, silver, lead, zinc, and copper. The town got its name in a peculiarly tender way. In 1912, a general store owner named Julius Andrews established the local post office and named it after his wife, Leila B. Ruby Andrews. So the whole town ended up carrying a woman's name. That's actually kind of sweet, until you hear what happened next. Between 1920 and 1922, Ruby became the scene of 3 separate double homicides. These killings, carried out by bandits in the surrounding desert, became collectively known as the Ruby Murders, and they triggered the largest manhunt in the history of the American Southwest. It was also the first time an airplane was ever used in an Arizona manhunt. In the 1930s, Ruby had a peak population of around 1,200 people. The Montana mine, by that point operated by the Eagle Pitcher Mining Company, was the leading producer of lead and zinc in Arizona from 1934 to 1937, and third in silver production in 1936. Then, the ore ran out. The mine closed in 1940, the post office shut down in May 1941, and Ruby was abandoned almost overnight. Today, approximately 25 buildings still stand with their roofs intact, including the old jail, a schoolhouse, and the ruins of the Mercantile. The schoolhouse in particular has attracted its share of ghost stories over the years. Explorers and historians who've walked through it have described an unexplained presence inside, though whether you take that seriously is entirely your business. Ruby is one of the 2 best-preserved mining ghost towns in Arizona, the other being Vulture City, which we'll get to shortly. During its most productive stretch, the Montana mine pulled out more than $10 million in lead, zinc, and copper between 1909 and 1949. That's a lot of mineral wealth extracted from a valley that most people today couldn't find on a map without help. Ruby had been open to visitors for more than 30 years. Self-guided tours, a site map, 2 lakes, trails, before quietly closing to the public in 2024. Another door shut on a place that's had more than its share of them. Ghost Town 12, Vulture City. Speaking of Vulture City, this one deserves its own entry, because it is genuinely one of the most consequential ghost towns in the American West, and most people outside of Arizona have never heard of it. In 1863, a German immigrant and prospector named Henry Wickenburg followed a quartz outcropping in the Sonoran Desert and discovered gold. He named his mine after the vultures he saw circling the area, and what followed was nothing short of extraordinary. The Vulture mine went on to produce 340,000 ounces of gold and 260,000 ounces of silver, making it the richest gold mine in Arizona history. At its peak, the town that grew around it, Vulture City, had nearly 5,000 residents. There was a schoolhouse, a blacksmith shop, a cookhouse, boarding houses, saloons, a post office, the whole frontier package. And then there was the hanging tree, an old ironwood tree near Wickenburg's cabin that served as the town's preferred method of justice. 18 men were hanged on that tree, most of them accused of high grading, which is the mining industry's polite term for stealing ore from the company. One writer of the era actually described Vulture City as a neat village, complete with a free reading hall and a literary society. That is an interesting combination of details. A town that hanged 18 men and also hosted a book club. The mine continued operating under various owners through the decades, including former Colorado Senator Horace Tabor, who owned it for a period. In 1942, the US government shut it down as a non-essential operation during World War II. The town was abandoned shortly after. The ghost town sat deteriorating for decades until 2017, when a restoration effort began that saved more than 16 original buildings. Today, Vulture City is open for tours from October through May. You can walk under the hanging tree, explore the assay office, and look through the old brothel. The mine itself, under separate ownership, is still an active operation. Henry Wickenburg himself, by the way, never truly profited from his discovery. He sold 80% of his interest for a promised $85,000, but reportedly only collected $25,000 due to title disputes. History can be cruel. Ghost Town 11. Two Guns. If you've ever driven I-40 between Flagstaff and Winslow, you've passed the exit for Two Guns without knowing it. And if you knew what happened there, you might have stopped. Two Guns sits on the east rim of Canyon Diablo, about 30 miles east of Flagstaff. Long before any settlement existed, the area had been inhabited by Native Americans, with artifacts dating back to between 1050 and 1600 AD. The more recent dark history begins in 1878, when a group of Apaches hiding in a cave near the canyon to escape a Navajo raid were discovered. The Navajo lit sagebrush fires at the cave's entrance and shot anyone who tried to escape. 42 Apaches died inside that cave, which later became known as the Apache Death Cave. By the early 1920s, a couple named Earl and Louise Cundiff had established a trading post near the Canyon Diablo crossing. Then came Harry Miller. Miller was an eccentric character, to put it generously. He called himself Chief Crazy Thunder, claimed to be full-blooded Apache, leased land from the Cundiffs in 1925, and built a zoo stocked with mountain lions, cougars, Gila monsters, and bobcats. He named the town Two Guns in honor of silent film star William S. Hart, also known as Two Gun Bill, and turned the Apache Death Cave into a paid tourist attraction, complete with electric lights and a concession stand. He also sold Apache skulls to tourists, which tells you something about the man. In 1926, Miller shot and killed Earl Cundiff during a dispute over their lease. The exact circumstances are disputed. One account says Cundiff entered Miller's room with a gun and Miller drew first. Either way, Miller was acquitted. Shortly after, he was mauled by one of his own mountain lions, twice, and then bitten by one of his own Gila monsters. He eventually left the state, reportedly taking a considerable amount of turquoise jewelry and silver merchandise with him on the way out. The town kept going for a few more decades along Route 66, and Louise Cundiff even rebuilt portions of it on the opposite side of the canyon after Route 66 was rerouted. But once Interstate 40 bypassed the area entirely and a gas station burned in 1971, Two Guns quietly died. The ruins of the zoo, the trading post, and the burned gas station still stand today. The canyon and the cave are still there. Whether the curse is still there is something you'll have to decide for yourself. Ghost Town 10. Fairbank. Fairbank is not exactly a well-known name, but it played a surprisingly important role in keeping Tombstone alive during its silver boom years. Located along the San Pedro River in Cochise County, Fairbank was established in 1881 as a railroad depot and commercial hub. It wasn't a mining town. It was the supply town that fed the mining towns. Tombstone's silver had to go somewhere to be processed, and the rails ran through Fairbank. Goods, food, and people all passed through here on their way to and from the more famous towns of the region. The town includes a story that sounds like it should be in a Western novel. In 1900, a gang attempted to rob the Fairbank train station and was repelled by a Wells Fargo messenger named Jeff Milton, who, despite being shot in the arm, held off the robbers and prevented the robbery from succeeding. The mercantile building in Fairbank still bears evidence of that confrontation. When Tombstone's silver ran out, Fairbank's purpose evaporated along with it. The post office lingered on into the mid-20th century, but the town steadily emptied. Today, Fairbank is managed by the Bureau of Land Management and is free to visit. The old schoolhouse still stands and functions as a small visitor center. The San Pedro River flowing nearby creates a surprisingly green and birdwatcher-friendly oasis in the otherwise dry desert landscape. The site also connects to a network of hiking trails along the San Pedro Riparian National Conservation Area, which makes it more than just a ghost town visit. It's genuinely a pleasant place to spend a few hours. For a town that most people have never heard of, Fairbank did a lot of quiet work keeping southeastern Arizona functional in its heyday. Ghost Town 9. Pierce. In 1894, a rancher named James Pierce was working his land about 13 miles from Wilcox in southeastern Arizona when he stumbled onto a piece of gold. That discovery led directly to the establishment of the Commonwealth Mine and the boomtown that would bear his name. The town of Pierce grew fast. By 1896, it had a post office. A railroad station came shortly after. By 1919, Pierce had a population of around 1,500 people, with schools, hotels, saloons, and general stores filling out its streets. The Commonwealth Mine became one of the more productive gold operations in southeastern Arizona. The mine itself sat in a range called the Dos Cabezas Mountains, and at its most active, it employed a significant portion of the town's workforce directly or indirectly. Merchants, hoteliers, and saloon owners all depended on the mine's payroll making its way through town each week. Then, the 1930s arrived, the Great Depression took hold, and Pierce slowly bled out. People left looking for better prospects elsewhere, and the town never recovered its footing. What remains of Pierce today includes 2 buildings listed on the National Register of Historic Places, the Soto Brothers and Renault General Store, which dates to 1894, and the Our Lady of Victory Catholic Church. A handful of people still live in and around the area, making Pierce one of those places that straddles the line between ghost town and barely their community. The old store functions as a small museum. It's quiet, unhurried, and genuinely atmospheric. If you're doing a ghost town road trip through southeastern Arizona, Pierce, Gleeson, and Courtland are all within a few miles of each other, which makes them an efficient and worthwhile cluster. Ghost Town 8. Gleeson. While we're in southeastern Arizona, Gleeson is right there, and it earns its own entry. Gleeson sits in the Dragoon Mountains area of Cochise County, east of Tombstone. It was a copper mining town that had its moment of relevance in the early 20th century. A fire wiped out much of the original town in 1912, but the World War I demand for copper gave it a temporary reprieve. The post office closed in 1939, and Gleeson gradually wound down from there. What makes Gleeson distinct among Arizona ghost towns is its jail. The Gleeson jail was built of concrete in 1910 to replace an earlier wooden frame jail, and before that, a literal oak tree that served as the town's jailhouse. Because why build a jail when you have a perfectly good tree? The concrete jail still stands today and functions as a small local history museum, open on the first Saturday of each month. A few residents still live in the area, and the old school ruins, a cemetery, and scattered structures give the place a genuinely eerie quality. The cemetery, in particular, is worth a slow walk. The inscriptions on some of the older headstones tell you everything you need to know about what life expectancy looked like in an early 20th century copper mining town in the Arizona desert. Gleeson is on private property in parts, so it's worth knowing what's publicly accessible before you make the trip out. Ghost Town 7. Chloride. Chloride, in Mojave County in northwestern Arizona, holds a particular distinction. It is one of the oldest continuously inhabited towns in the state. Silver was first discovered in the Surbat Mountains of the area around 1863, but chloride itself was established around 1870. The post office opened in 1873. The town got its name from the silver chloride ore that was pulled from the nearby mines. At its height, Chloride was a genuine boomtown. It had hotels, a bank, a hospital, a theater, and no shortage of saloons. The kind of place where a miner could cash out on a Friday, lose half of it by Saturday night, and still show up Monday ready to go back underground. One of the more productive mines in the area, the Tennessee Schuylkill, reportedly produced $7.5 million in gold, silver, copper, lead, and zinc between the late 1890s and the late 1940s. A hotel advertisement from 1899 boldly declared that Chloride was destined to be the greatest lead-producing camp in Mojave County. Optimism has always been a mining town specialty. The arrival of the railroad in Kingman in the 1880s helped open the area to larger-scale operations, and a 25-mile branch line from Kingman to Chloride was completed in 1899. Mining continued in fits and starts through the 20th century. Today, Chloride still has a small, permanent population, somewhere in the range of a few hundred people. It's technically a living ghost town, and that gives it a particular charm. The historic district has an old jail, antique shops, murals painted on rocks at the edge of town, and residents who will happily tell you the history over a cup of coffee. It's the kind of place that doesn't take itself too seriously, which is part of why it survived when other towns didn't. Ghost Town 6, Swansea. Swansea, in La Paz County in western Arizona, is one of those ghost towns that feels like it's been forgotten, even by the people who write about ghost towns. It was established in 1909 by the Clara Consolidated Gold and Copper Mining Company, and British investors poured significant money into the operation. At its peak, Swansea had around 300 to 500 residents, a foundry, an electric light plant, and even a narrow-gauge electric railway connecting it to nearby operations. They built dams to collect water in one of the driest parts of Arizona, and when the dams weren't enough, they constructed a pipeline to haul water from 30 miles away. The sheer ambition of keeping Swansea running is impressive in retrospect. Less impressive was the ore quality, which turned out to be poor, and the logistical costs, which turned out to be crippling. By around 1912, the main operations had collapsed. Some sporadic activity continued into the 1920s, but Swansea never recovered. Today, Swansea is managed by the Bureau of Land Management and is free to visit. What's remarkable about it is how much is still standing. Worker cottages with partially restored roofs, a railroad depot, smelter ruins, 2 cemeteries, and scattered mining equipment that was simply left where it sat. Historical signs throughout the site help orient visitors. Getting there requires a high-clearance vehicle and a stretch of unpaved desert road, roughly 30 miles east of Parker. The isolation that doomed Swansea is also what has preserved it. It's too remote to be easily vandalized or stripped, which is more than can be said for many Arizona ghost towns closer to highways. On clear nights, the stargazing is extraordinary. There is something to be said for a place that failed so thoroughly at its original purpose that it ended up perfectly preserved by accident. Ghost Town 5, Harshaw. David Harshaw was a miner and cattleman who, in the late 1870s, found silver in the Patagonia hills of Santa Cruz County in southern Arizona. He established the Hermosa Mine, and a small town quickly grew around it. For 2 years, roughly 1879 to 1881, Harshaw was a genuine boomtown, with a population that reportedly reached 600 people. That is a remarkable number for such a remote and rugged corner of southern Arizona. The town had stores, a post office, saloons, and all the usual accompaniments of a mining camp riding a silver wave. Then fire and flooding hit the town in the early 1880s, and the population drained rapidly. By the late 1880s, fewer than 100 people remained. The post office closed in 1903, and Harshaw faded out completely. The Mexicans who passed through the area had their own name for the place. They called it Durazno, which means peach, after the fruit trees that grew there. Today, what remains of Harshaw is mostly ruins. Adobe foundations, stone walls, a few surviving structures, and a lonely cemetery with headstones that speak directly to the hardships of frontier life. Trees have grown through former buildings. The road to Harshaw runs through Coronado National Forest and requires some navigating on unpaved roads. It's not the most accessible spot on this list, but it is one of the more atmospheric, the kind of place where you can stand in the middle of what was once a 600-person town and hear absolutely nothing but wind. There is a particular quality to a ghost town that nature has started to reclaim. Harshaw has it in full. Ghost Town 4, Gold Road. Gold Road sits along Route 66 in Mojave County, near the Black Mountains close to the California border. It was a gold mining town that went through the full boom and bust cycle not once, but several times. Gold was first discovered in the area around 1900, and the town that grew around the Gold Road mine had a productive run in the first decades of the 20th century. The mine was worked intermittently through the 1920s and 1930s. Then, in 1942, the railroad closures and wartime priorities that killed so many Arizona mining towns finished off Gold Road as well. The mine was shut down, and the buildings were demolished, not by time, but deliberately, reportedly to avoid paying taxes on them. That is one way to handle the situation. It's a decision that has puzzled historians ever since, because what could have been one of Arizona's more complete ghost town sites was instead reduced to foundations and scattered debris by the very people who built it. History has a way of being its own worst enemy sometimes. The mine was reopened in the 1970s and produced gold again into the 1990s. Some original structures survived in the surrounding area, and a small museum dedicated to Gold Road's history now operates nearby. The site sits close to Oatman, which is a living ghost town on Route 66, famous for the wild burros that roam its streets, descendants of the pack animals miners left behind when the gold ran out. If you're doing a Route 66 drive through western Arizona, Gold Road and Oatman together make for a worthwhile stop. Ghost Town 3. Courtland. Courtland is one of 3 ghost towns clustered together in Cochise County's southeastern corner, the others being Pierce and Gleeson, both already mentioned. Courtland existed almost entirely for copper. It was established around 1909 when copper deposits were discovered in the area. The town grew quickly, and by some estimates had a few hundred to a few thousand residents at its height. Accounts vary. It had a post office, stores, and the usual infrastructure of a working mining community. Then the copper ran out around 1909 to 1910, and the town depopulated just as fast as it had filled up. The post office closed, businesses shuttered, and Courtland became one of the quieter entries in Arizona's long catalog of abandoned mining communities. What you find at Courtland today is mostly foundations and scattered ruins, including a distinctive concrete jail that still stands. Like the jails of several other Arizona ghost towns, Courtland's has outlasted everything around it. Concrete, it turns out, is more stubborn than silver prices. The site is accessible and sits along what locals and travel writers sometimes call the Ghost Town Trail, a loose circuit through this southeastern corner of Cochise County that lets you hit Pierce, Courtland, and Gleeson in a single day. If you're the kind of person who enjoys wandering through ruins with no other tourists around, this is a good day trip. Ghost Town 2, Charleston. Charleston, not the one in South Carolina, was a mill town built in 1878 specifically to process silver ore from Tombstone, about 10 miles to the northeast. Tombstone had the mines. Charleston had the mills. The San Pedro River provided the water needed to run the milling operations, which is why the town was built where it was, rather than next to the mines themselves. At its peak, Charleston and its neighboring mill town Millville were essential parts of the Tombstone silver economy. The town had a rough reputation, even by frontier standards. It was known as a haven for outlaws, rustlers, and men who preferred to avoid the relative order of Tombstone. Members of the Clanton Gang, whose feud with Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday culminated in the 1881 gunfight at the OK Corral, were known to frequent Charleston and the surrounding area. When Tombstone's mines flooded in the early 1880s and silver production collapsed, Charleston had nothing to mill and no reason to exist. The town emptied out quickly. A major flood in 1887 destroyed much of what remained, and subsequent flooding over the decades finished the job. Today, Charleston is one of the more thoroughly erased entries on this list. Adobe ruins melt back into the earth with each rainy season, and what remains along the San Pedro River is fragmentary at best. The Bureau of Land Management manages the area, and it's part of a larger riparian conservation area that's genuinely beautiful if you visit in the right season. Spring and fall are ideal. In summer, you'll be reminded very quickly why people stopped living here voluntarily. The irony of Charleston is that the thing that made it possible, the San Pedro River, is also what erased it. Water gives and water takes, and in the Arizona desert, it rarely apologizes for either. Ghost Town 1. Stanton. We'll close with Stanton because it has a story that is less about silver and more about a man who was, by most accounts, genuinely unpleasant. Stanton started as a gold mining camp in the Antelope Creek area of Yavapai County in the 1860s. The original camp was called Antelope Station, and it had a reasonably productive gold operation for the era. Then a man named Charles P. Stanton arrived. Stanton was a storekeeper and, depending on who you ask, something considerably worse. He was reportedly involved in orchestrating violence against rival merchants and other residents to consolidate control over the local economy. His methods were, to say the least, not sanctioned by any legal system. The town eventually took his name. Stanton himself was shot and killed in 1886, reportedly by a group of Mexican outlaws, though local accounts suggest the motive was more complicated than a random attack, and more than a few people in the area were likely relieved when it happened. After his death, the camp continued operating in reduced form through the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Today, Stanton is a ghost town with a small collection of surviving adobe structures, including the old hotel and general store. What makes it a little unusual is that it is privately owned by the Lost Dutchman's Mining Association, a recreational gold mining club that uses the site for organized outings. Members camp there and work the surrounding area for gold placer deposits. So in a strange way, Stanton is still being mined, just by enthusiasts on weekends, rather than by desperate prospectors in the 1870s. The gold, apparently, is still out there in small quantities. The name Stanton honors a man by most accounts unworthy of the honor, which makes it a fitting end to a list that has covered murder, floods, military shutdowns, and a zoo full of mountain lions. Arizona's ghost towns are nothing if not consistent in their drama. Arizona's ghost towns are not just abandoned places. They are a record of what happens when ambition outruns resources. When a vein runs dry, a railroad gets rerouted, or a government shuts something down in the name of war. The people who lived in these towns built schools, jails, churches, and hospitals. They named post offices after their wives and hung men from ironwood trees. They survived floods, fires, and bandits, and then quietly left when the thing that brought them there was gone. Most of these places don't make the tourist brochures. Most of them never will, but they're worth knowing about. If you found this video interesting, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe. It helps more than you'd think, and there's a lot more history like this coming. Thanks for watching.